Hi, welcome to the Micro Unit 2B review. Here's what a supply and demand graph looks like without trade, with this being the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. Okay, so now let's try and find the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. Now in order to try and find the consumer surplus, we can look at the demand curve and compare the prices that consumers would pay to the price that consumers did actually pay. Because of that, the consumer surplus ends up being this shaded area right here. Now, in order to find producer surplus, we're going to use the same method, except we're going to look at the supply curve instead of the demand curve. So looking at the supply curve, we're going to look at the prices that producers would have sold the product for compared to the price they actually did sell the product for. Because of that, the producer surplus ends up being this shaded area right here. Now let's look at how the supply and demand graph changes when you add trade. As you can see here, we have a supply and demand graph with trade, which is shown by the additional horizontal world supply line, as you can see here. Now, because the world can supply the same product at a lower price, the new equilibrium has a lower price than the first one. This tends to eliminate many domestic producers, specifically the producers right over here on the supply line, because now consumers, rather than buying at that higher price, can just import the good and pay the world price. Now, in order to find how many of these goods we import as a result of world trade, we look at the quantity demanded at the new equilibrium price, and then we move over to the demand line and find where the demand line is above the supply line, which goes until right there. After darting down to see the quantity demanded, this quantity right here is the amount of products that we import. Now let's try and find the new consumer surplus and the new producer surplus to see how this changes as a result of trade. Finding producer surplus by finding the price that producers would have sold the product for compared to the actual price the producers did sell the product for. We see that producer surplus drastically decreases as a result of world trade. Consumer surplus, on the other hand, which is found by finding the price that consumers would have paid compared to the price they actually did pay, drastically increases as a result of world trade. As you can see here, the consumer surplus area is way greater than before. Now that we have graphed the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the quantity of the product that's imported, let's find the quantity of product that is sold domestically. Now, if we look at the producer surplus over here, producers would have sold at a price lower than the equilibrium price. So these producers are selling the product for a price that's, as I said earlier, lower than the equilibrium price, which is more ideal for consumers. So this quantity right here is the amount of the product that is sold domestically. So looking at the graph as a whole, who benefits the most from world trade? Evidently, consumers benefit the most from world trade because they get to pay a lower price. Producers, on the other hand, not so much, because the new and lower equilibrium price drastically cuts the amount of producers who can sell the product, therefore lowering the producer surplus area.